not go so far as to really make the English church Protestant. The man who really makes the English church Protestant is Thomas Cranmer, and he is able to do it because after Henry dies, Henry's son, Edward VI, becomes king. Edward VI has been raised a Protestant. Edward VI has actually had Thomas Cranmer as his tutor. Two-door, not two-door, I realize that's closely connected. And when Edward VI takes over as England, he is rabid to bring Protestant precepts to him. The man who does that for him is Thomas Cranmer, who will, well, we're going to talk about this in some detail, but it's Thomas Cranmer who is burned at the stake by Mary Tudor, and it's before that, more than anything else, she is known as Bloody Mary. He's born in 1489 in Nottinghamshire. He's ordained at Oxford. And in 1526, he gets a Doctor of Divinity, so he can be referred to as a divine, just as our pastor can be referred to as a divine. And he likes it when you do that. When you say, are you a divine? Yes. Our pastor is also a doctor. 1527 to 32, Cardinal Wolsey is the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he's one of Henry's closest advisors. And it's Cardinal Wolsey who gets the unfortunate task of procuring the divorce for Henry from Catherine of Aragon. So poor Cardinal Wolsey is the guy who has to petition the Pope and et cetera, et cetera. So Cranmer actually assists Cardinal Wolsey with a quest to get Henry VIII's marriage annulled. And he becomes part of a delegation that seeks the opinions of continental scholars on the divorce issue. And it is on this trip that he is exposed to Protestant ideas. Well, that's actually the next bullet. January 1532, he's appointed ambassador to the court of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. But he travels with an entourage to Nuremberg, and there he is exposed to Lutheran ideas. And he decides that Luther is right. He decides that a faith alone and Bible alone, that's right. So it is during this process that he becomes exposed to Lutheran ideas. To further that, July 1532, he marries a niece of Nuremberg reformer Andreas Osiander's wife. So he marries a woman who is actually related to one of the reformers of the continent. October 1st, 1532, Cardinal Wolsey is no longer in the picture. And I can't remember if Henry VIII simply kicked him out or he executed him. I can't remember. Does anybody know? I can't remember what happened to Wolsey. But anyway, Cranmer is appointed Archbishop of Canterbury on October 1st, 1532. He's consecrated several months later. And this is happening at an important time because remember, it's in 1534 when the Act of Supremacy is passed. And Henry VIII becomes the head of the church. So it is the very point that that's about to happen that this hidden Protestant takes over as Archbishop of Canterbury and starts working behind the scenes to make England Protestant. January 1533, Henry VIII marries Anne Boleyn and locks up Catherine of Aragon in her castle. May 23rd, 1533, Cranmer rules the marriage between Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon is null and void because Henry had married his brother's widow, which he had gotten actually a pass on from the Pope when he married her originally. June 1st, 1533, he officially makes Anne Boleyn queen. So why is all this happening? Well, Henry VIII is able to do all this stuff from a political standpoint, but he wants church backing for it. Well, he's not going to get backing from the Pope, so who does he get backing from? He gets backing from his own Archbishop of Canterbury that he had put into place. This is how you do it, folks. If you're a king, or you're a president, or you're an emperor, or you're a prime minister, and you want something to happen, and and there's a body or a person who's keeping that from happening, you just put somebody else in a position of authority and let them rule in your favor. July 9th, 1533, Pope Clement VII excommunicates Henry VIII. He excommunicates Cranmer and others unless the marriage to Anne Boleyn is reversed. Cranmer's response is, I don't think Henry VIII responded that way, but that was Cranmer's official response. September 7, 1533, Elizabeth is born to Henry and Anne Boleyn, and she is personally baptized by Thomas Cranmer. Now, I realize we haven't yet got to the point of Cranmer being a Protestant. We haven't got to that point yet, but we're going to. Stay with me. We're just setting the background. Now, 1535, if you ever read Machiavelli's The Prince, one of the things he says is if you're the head guy, you want to set your underlings fighting with each other so they're not focused on usurping your power. So, remember, Thomas Cranmer is Archbishop of Canterbury, so you would think he would be kind of the spiritual head of the Church of England, if Henry was the political head. 1535, Thomas Cromwell is appointed vice-regent and given final say over ecclesiastical matters. So now we have this vice-regent guy, and we have the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Henry leaves it unclear who really has the final say over church business. And if any of you were wondering, remember it was Thomas Cromwell when we talked about him, and we talked about some of the dictates he made while he was vice-regent, and one of them was that every church should have an English Bible in it, so people can come up and read it. And there were several things he did, we talked about them several weeks ago, that were very Protestant, and he sent these dictates out. We wonder what authority did he send these dictates out? It wasn't just because he was a crony of the king. He sent these dictates out because he was appointed vice-regent and had say over ecclesiastical matters. Of course, he ends up a year later losing his head, so that removes the competition from Cranmer. 1538 to 1539, Cranmer negotiates with Lutheran representatives for a possible alliance. And he knows all these people, because remember, he went on his tour of Germany a few years before. April 1539, the Great Bible is published with a foreword by Thomas Cranmer. The Great Bible is the official English translation of the English Church. And of course, what they did was they took most of Tyndale's translation, and they put it in a new wrapper, and they said, here's the Bible. July 28, 1539, Cromwell is executed. Probably a great mistake on Henry VIII's part, because he had a weasel toady to do whatever he wanted, and he executed the weasel toady.
And that's because he would not bless the divorce, or?
No. Thomas Cromwell was...
I thought he was, yeah, well, why was he executed?
Because he was considered to be conspiring with Anne Boleyn to bring Lutheran ideals into England, which of course he was.
Yeah, okay, all right.
1543, accusations are made against Cranmer by church traditionalists. So even though Henry VIII has pulled away from the Catholic Church in a political sense, and he's destroyed the monastery system, there's still this going on. Okay, well, so now we're the Church of England. What the heck is the Church of England?
Anglican Catholic.
Is it Catholic? Is it Protestant? So this is still going on. So the traditionalists, the ones who want to keep the services Catholic, they make accusations against Cranmer. During the same time, Parliament passes the Act for the Advancement of True Religion, which specifies that only those of noble birth should be allowed to read the Bible. So, how many people think Cranmer supported that? Of course he did. He's horrified by that. But he simply buys his time, because Henry VIII is getting larger and larger and larger, and sicker and sicker and sicker. And he knows that his time is coming, when the boy king is crowned. Henry VIII died January 28, 1547. and he is gone. And the boy king is crowned at age 8. And one interesting thing about the boy king, Edward VI, is while of course they don't actually let him rule England when he's 8 years old, they have a regency council. But curiously enough, he is still officially the head of the Church of England. There was no regency council. His position is head of the church. So from the time he's 8, he just tells Cranmer, "Go for it! I'm in charge, and I'm putting you in charge." And that's when the blossom of Protestantism occurs. So February 20th, 1547, they don't let too much grass grow on Henry's grave before they crown Edward VI as king. 1549, now we're getting into why Cranmer is number 2. The Book of Common Prayer is published. It's edited, at least, or maybe written by Cranmer himself, and it establishes the liturgy of the Anglican service, and it's still in use today. And guess what? The Anglican service is not in Latin.
No, but it is very Catholic. Very, very.
1540, Cranmer publishes a defense of the true and Catholic doctrine of the sacrament of the body and the blood of Christ, in which he rejects the doctrine of transubstantiation. So now another blow against Catholicism in England.
That's, I mean, considering that Henry executed Thomas Cromwell for being Lutheran, for being too Protestant, for being Protestant.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know,
And Anne Boleyn, too.
for being Protestant.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Henry VIII was concerned, he was still Catholic.
Absolutely.
He just was not Roman.
I fully 100% agree with you.
And this is a case of when I'll say this, the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Catholic Church are neither fish nor fowl. They are in the gray area between the two.
But Henry's dead. We're talking about Edward VI.
Now we're thinking, yes.
When the blossom of Protestantism is just budding all through England. May 1553, he publishes the 42 Articles, which eventually becomes the 39 Articles, an exposition of the doctrinal views of the Anglican Church. If you read them, and no, I'm not going to force you to go through them today with me, but if you read them, they sound suspiciously Lutheran or Reformed. July 6, 1553, one of the most awful moments in the history of England, the boy king dies after a particularly horrible bout of tuberculosis. October 1st, 1553, Mary becomes queen. Cranmer had, unfortunately for Cranmer, supported her rival, Lady Jane Grey, who we've already discussed. She was the granddaughter of Henry VIII's younger sister, Queen Mary of France. And unfortunately for her, he had supported Lady Jane Grey. September 1553, Cranmer is placed in the Tower of London for continuing to support Protestant theology and conventions under one Mary Tudor. And March 21st, 1556, Cranmer is burned at the stake after recanting several earlier recantations of Reformation faith in Oxford, England. Now, did you follow that? So when he was captured, they basically told him, look, you're going to die. We're going to kill you. But if you recant all this Protestantism stuff, then, we'll kill you
Before he burned.
Before we burn you. So Cranmer recant, I recant all the Protestant stuff. But when he is put on the pyre, when he's standing on the pyre, and the guy's here with a garrote in his hands, and he's going to kill them before they light the flames, he recants of his recantation. And he starts lecturing Mary, and he starts lecturing the Catholics that have come back on the true faith. And this is why Cranmer is not just considered the father of Protestantism in England, he's also considered a martyr.
First martyr
of Protestantism in England. The architect of the reforms that changed England from Catholic practice to Protestant practice was Thomas Cranmer. Created the Book of Common Prayer and the 39 Articles. Again, the Book of Common Prayer defines the liturgy of the church. The 39 Articles defines the theology of the church. The Evangelical Presbyterian Church has the 7 essentials and all that. The 39 had a primarily Protestant view of the world, which perhaps started when he discussed
Premise-wise.
theology in Nuremberg with the Protestant elders in 1532. All the time he was Archbishop of Canterbury, he was in communication with Protestant leaders on the continent and in England, including John Knox in Scotland, John Calvin, Jan Lasky, John Hooper, and Peter Martyr. While he cautiously started guiding England towards Protestant ideals as Archbishop under Henry VIII, it was not until Henry's son became king that the sweeping reforms occurred. Some of the reforms under Edward VI, removal of the requirement for clerical celibacy.
Really?
Rejection of transubstantiation. Abolition of the Mass. And when they say abolition of the Mass, what that's referring to is the Latin business. So the Mass is now, the service is now done in English, which is the second. Cranmer's influence ended when Mary Tudor, or Bloody Mary, became Queen of England and attempted to revert England to Catholicism. Cranmer's imprisoned in the Tower, threatened with torture. Initially, he recants of his Protestant views. However, faced with death by hanging, he recants of his earlier recantations and dies a martyr, alive by fire. The execution of Cranmer, as captured by John Fox in his Acts and Monuments, Book of Martyrs. And now I come to the great thing which so much troubleth my conscience, more than any other thing that I ever did or said in my whole life. And that is the setting abroad of a writing contrary to the truth, which now here I renounce and refuse as things written by my hand contrary to the truth, which I thought in my heart, and written for fear of death, and to save my life if it might be. And that is all such bills and papers which I have written or signed with my hand since my degradation, wherein I have written many things untrue. And forasmuch as my hand offended, writing contrary to my heart, my hand shall first be punished therefore, for may I come to the fire, it shall be first burned. So he gives his speech while they're taking him up to the fire. And remember that, the part about his hand. As for the Pope, I refuse him as Christ, Antichrist, with all his false doctrine. This does not endear him to Mary Tudor. And when the wood was kindled and the fire began to burn near him, stretching out his arm, he put his right hand into the flame, which he had held so steadfast and immovable, saving at once with the same hand he wiped his face, that all men might see his hand burn before his body was touched. He said, this was the hand I did my recantation with. Let it burn in the flames. His body did abide to burning with such steadfastness that he seemed to move no more than the stake to which he was bound. His eyes were lifted up unto heaven, and he repeated his unworthy right hand, so long as his voice would suffer him. And he used often the words of Stephen, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. In the greatness of the flame, he gave up the ghost. And Fox, John Fox, Cranmer, of course, becomes a martyr. John Fox makes him a martyr for the ages. Because John Fox writes, the only person that John Fox writes more glowingly about in his tome is Elizabeth I becoming the Queen of England. But next to that, Cranmer is the one which he elevates above all others.
It is really impressive.
And there is a wonderful look at Cranmer in the flame. And notice he has his hand out in the flames as he's burning. Isn't that wonderful?
Oh, yeah. Ooh. Ah.
That was actually in the 1887 edition of Fox's Acts and Monuments.
That's a cool hat.
So, with 5 full minutes to spare, we have completed Henry VIII. We've completed Cranmer.